Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, partnering with donors from all walks of life to improve southeastern Virginia through grants, scholarships, and leadership initiatives. Learn more at hamptonroadscf.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. More than 2 years ago, ProPublica, in collaboration with the Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism at WHRO, published an award-winning series called Uprooted. It focused on American universities expanding their campuses through the use of eminent domain and the dismantling of Black and Brown communities. The reporting sparked state and local investigations into the practice. Up next on Another View, an update on the process underway to right a wrong. Investigative journalist Brandi Kellam joins us right after this national, regional, and local news from NPR and WHRO News.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Happy New Year, everyone, since I was not here last week, but I want to thank Lisa Godley and the Another View crew for holding things down in my absence. I really, really appreciate it. Before we jump into our show today, I do want to invite you to join me on, tomorrow evening at Chrysler Hall for Black Religious Music and the American Experience. Now, this is a discussion that will be held just before the Virginia Symphony Orchestra performs a new composition that was that will be performed by Curtis Stewart. Now, Curtis Stewart is the composer, and he put together a piece that is called I Wouldn't Stop There in the Words of a King. And this is to celebrate, obviously, Dr. Martin Luther King and the holiday this weekend. It's going to debut at Chrysler Hall on Friday, followed by a performance at the Ferguson Center for the Arts on the Peninsula on Saturday. Now, the free concerts include the Norfolk State University Choir, and these concerts are free. So prior to the debut of this new piece, we're going to hold a panel discussion called Black Religious Music and the American Experience. I have the honor of hosting it, and it's going to have a stellar group of people to talk about the influence of African American music on our country. And I hope that you will join us at 6:15 or so prior to the concert starting. And also, the symphony will also commemorate the King holiday with 2 free concerts. Now, this one is on January 18th at the Sandler Center, a tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In Virginia Beach. And then the second is at 7 p.m. on January 20th at Norcom High School in Portsmouth. All of these concerts are absolutely free. So come on out and listen to some beautiful music and celebrate the holiday. You can visit virginiasymphony.org to register and get more information. So the Shoe Lane community in Newport News, have you ever heard of it? It was a successful Black neighborhood with middle-class families, doctors, teachers, and professionals who owned their homes during segregation. But in the 1960s, the all-white Newport News City Council used eminent domain to seize the land for the expansion of Christopher Newport University. Now, this practice of public universities displacing Black communities is not unique to CNU, as was revealed in the ProPublica and the Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism at WHRO series called Uprooted. We are pleased to have with us today investigative journalist Brandi Kellam. the lead reporter on the series who has been intimately involved with this story from the beginning. She brings us an update on the progress of righting a wrong. Brandi is also a 2025-2026 Spencer Education Fellow with Columbia University and an adjunct professor of journalism at Norfolk State University. Brandi, you're not like busy or anything, are you?
No, it's not like I'm not sleeping or anything, right?
Exactly. Welcome to Another View. Thank you so much. So you've been working on this for 3 years or more.
More, yeah.
At this point. For those who may not have caught Uprooted from the beginning, take us back and tell us exactly what it was about and what this issue is that we're talking about.
Yeah, so basically Uprooted really does, in a nutshell, and I'll go into a little bit more detail, but it really puts into context the displacement of Black communities through the lens of higher education, right? Most people think about Black community displacement and they think about highways running through Black communities and things like that, but we rarely have taken that conversation through the lens of what universities actually did to perpetuate Black land laws, and Uprooted really does take the initiative, and it does a great job of exploring that topic very thoroughly. So with the particular stories that we covered in that series, you know, we centered around one university in Newport News because the story there was just so deep with trauma and history that it was almost like and I hate to say it this way, but the perfect case study for how universities have been used to displace Black communities. So Christopher Newport University, just quick history, was established in 1960. 1961, they did not have a permanent location for the campus. And so they were looking for one. And at the same time, you know, the 1960s is the height of segregation in our country. There's a lot going on with redlining and things to keep Black residents pretty much like sectioned off into certain areas of a city, right? So Christopher Newport University needing a permanent location was the reason that the all-white city council in 1961 decided to target this historic Black community that had been around at least dating back to the late 1800s. So think like post-slavery. Some of these people had a lot of land, not just 1 or 2 acres. Some families had upwards of 30 acres to themselves. It was a 100-acre community of Black families that had moved in to try to find a safe haven to start building community. And most of them were farmers in the late 1800s up until 1960, when the community started to transition from mainly farmland to a Black middle class neighborhood. And these weren't just your average Black middle classers, okay? You had a NASA engineer, one of the first Black NASA engineers in our country. He actually worked with Katherine Johnson, so we know the story about Hidden Figures.
Hidden Figures, yes.
So think about someone like that. Lawrence Brown was his name, and his daughter still lives in the family home, and I'll get to that in a second. But then you had teachers, principals. You had a robust group of Black professionals in this community, in addition to people who were still using their land for agricultural reasons. But the point is, it was developing, transitioning into...
And these people owned this land. This was their own land.
Yes, they owned this land. They actually, some of them built their homes but with whatever resources they could have. So I know one of the families said that he had someone helping him build the roof on his house. In our film, you see the Johnson family. Mr. Johnson is actually working on the foundation of his home. So now they did not have the resources to hire these prominent construction companies to build their homes. They actually did this themselves, pretty much by hand and with the support of whatever resources they had available to them. So now you're talking about the neighborhood is becoming Black middle class, and in the 1960s, the all-white city council of Newport News decided they did not want that community there. This is actually reported in our story. This is not hearsay. There's documentation of this, and the university has also, in their own research, acknowledged this fact, right? That the community was racially targeted by white leaders in the city to get rid of what our first story was called Erasing the Black Spot. They wanted to get rid of a black spot in an all white, what was it called?
And that was in the documentation.
It was. Yeah. We actually had in our documentary one of the former presidents of Christopher Newport say that he was told they wanted to erase the black spot, right? So, okay, that happens. They vote to take the center of the community by eminent domain. The center meaning if you have a 100-acre community, they're taking pretty much 60 acres in the central portion of the community by eminent domain. So essentially gutting the core of the community. Those residents were displaced. And then that's where, for most of our knowledge, our broader knowledge of this story, is where we all, at least for me and other people that I have talked to who weren't aware of this history, thought the story ended, right? 1960s, eminent domain happens, residents are displaced,
and when they took the land, did they compensate?
They did compensate,
people?
Right. So,
but no, did they compensate at the value?
No.
Let me rephrase that. Did they compensate at the value?
Right. So, arguably no, right? Because in our reporting, you see that their land was actually valued much higher than what they got for their land, because they went through several rounds of appraisals until the council people felt like this was the appropriate amount for this community.
Okay. So they utilized whatever tools they had in order to get these folks out.
Yes. It wasn't fair to the families. We can be clear and direct with that. It was not fair to those families. It was an injustice because they were targeted racially, and then they did not get fair value for their properties.
Okay. So they took 60%. Where, one, do we know where the people went? And two, what was the next step?
Yeah, so the people in the core were displaced. Now, from my reporting, some of them ended up going back downtown in this area, downtown Newport News. Some of them went other places. We don't know exactly. We can't track everyone's trajectory from that first displacement. But what's interesting is, like, remember I mentioned earlier, that most people thought the story ended in the 1960s, but it actually did not. It goes further out. It extends further out into present day, right? Because what I found interesting and what led me to start even going down the rabbit hole of reporting on this is finding out that there are still 5 homes that remain on that original footprint. So from 1960 up until present day, there were still people living around the perimeter. So you pretty much had the college like landing smack dab in the middle of, landing being constructed in the middle of what was a full and whole Black community of 100 acres. 60 acres gets gutted. Christopher Newport gets built on that. And then the remaining perimeter was still Black families, primarily Black families on Prince Drew Road, North Moores Lane, and Shoe Lane, right? And so then from 1960s up until the early 2010s, you see in our reporting how those homes, and we're talking about at one point like 90 properties, becomes engulfed by the college, and just one by one you just see them come down. Yeah, exactly.
You know, we received an email from one of the families there, Carmen Downing. And she wrote, quote, "There is nothing done with the property for many years." She was talking about well, let me go back a little bit. Her grandparents, Dr. Conway A. and Mildred Downing, and my uncle and aunt, James P. and Lorraine Shavers, owned at least 25 acres along Prince Drew Road that they purchased in the late 40s, early 50s. And the city of Newport News first took by eminent domain about 20 of those acres sometime in the 60s. She said there was nothing done with the property for many years. I can remember when the school finally erected a fence sometime in the late 70s or early 80s. In fact, my grandparents' brick barbecue was on the CNU's side of the fence for many, many years until they finally tore it down to begin work on what would become the football stadium. So, you know, I mean, when you hear how people's lives are actually impacted, and the thing is, she says that, you know, I could go on and on about how much that home meant to my family, the hard work that went into being able to purchase land and build there, and the beautiful family that lived there, the love. My grandfather took care of my grandmother who had Alzheimer's in that house. He cared for her until he succumbed to prostate cancer. He took his last breath in that house. You know, people can look at numbers and acreage and brick buildings, but without that human touch and understanding how this actually impacted people on a very real basis.
Yeah, it's triggering in some ways, right? You can feel through her account the pain that it caused to people who lived in this community. So it's not just a story for people to know about, it's to truly connect to what it means for someone, because this story speaks to not just a tragedy that happened to Black people, but what it means for someone to try against all odds, a group of people, not just one person, but a group of people actually trying against all odds to create community and a space of safety for their families, to create generational wealth that they could pass down to their, descendants, for that to just be snatched away and there's nothing they could really do about it, right?
So after your reporting, two things happened in terms of the state and the city of Newport News and Christopher Newport University paying attention. What happened?
Yeah, so after the reporting, there were two things that happened. There was a local task force that's a jointly launched task force with the city of Newport News, so city council, and Christopher Newport University. They were created by Mayor Philip Jones, who's the mayor of Newport News, and President Bill Kelly, who is the president of Christopher Newport University. That's a 6-member task force that's been around, that was launched actually 2 years ago. I'm not going to say today, but this month, basically. So we're in 2026. Yes.
So it's 2024 when they launched.
Yes, 2024. Okay. So 2 years ago this month. And then a few months after that, fast forward to roughly May of 2024, it was signed into law via the budget. I'm getting very technical here, but a General Assembly Commission that is also looking at this, but not just at Christopher Newport, but every college, every public university or public institution of higher education, I should say. They're looking at all those, and it's about 45 public institutions of higher education in the state of Virginia. That commission is looking into whether those institutions played a role in displacing primarily Black communities as well. And some of it, they're looking at, it could either be by eminent domain or purchases by other means. And that's important to distinguish, because we talk about this story, and yes, Christopher Newport was able to use, the city was able to use eminent domain to place Christopher Newport where it is today. And then there is reporting that shows that the school actually in later years did explore using that to further acquire homes. But this is not just about eminent domain. It's also about the action of a family feeling like, in the case of Christopher Newport, that they have no options left but to move, because there was this fear of them losing their homes just off the sheer fact that eminent domain even happened to begin with, right? So the state is actually looking at not just eminent domain use, but other purchases that were used to allow a university to expand into primarily Black communities.
So these task forces, or one commission, one task force, 2 years, where are they? Let's talk about the state one first, and then we'll come local.
Okay, yeah. So I have some interesting notes on the state's one. So first of all, the state, just so we can frame everything, so those who are just learning about this can understand, right?
Yeah, please put everything in context for us. That's good.
Okay, so the state commission is a 19-member commission. It has on it not just state senators and Virginia state delegates. It's bipartisan, but it also has on it members of the stakeholders in the higher education community. So, for example, the Department of Education, they have members on that commission. There's also former people who served in official capacities at universities. They may have been on a board of visitors somewhere. There are historians on this commission. So
they're really trying to look at it from all disciplines.
Right. So it seems collaborative in the sense that it's a larger body. It is open to the public, so you can access their meetings publicly. And also it's collaborative in the sense that it has different types of people who have different experiences or come to this from different places on this body, right?
And it is looking at all public universities within the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so that work has been ongoing for almost 2 years now. And they pretty much are in the stage of, they've already started doing some research, but it's very preliminary. Both the commission, I want to be fair here, both the commission and the task force are still in their very early stages of talking to impacted families. For the commission's sake, they haven't necessarily begun that deep historical oral history aspect of their work, although they say they intend to do so. Right now, they are really more about making sure they have, from what I understand, a structure in place that can ensure that they do this process fairly and thoroughly. So that's where they are right now.
Well, one of the things that they did do was send out a survey
to
all of the schools. What were some of the results of that?
Yeah, that was really interesting because so let's be clear, the survey is a self-reported survey. So what I mean by this is that the homework was done by the universities themselves. There wasn't really any outside research done or outside independent researchers completing the survey for the universities.
Uh-huh.
And the language the language from the survey responses, it reflects that basically. That's why I find it interesting, because one of the primary questions, so like I said, it's 45 public institutions of higher education. Most of them were sent this survey. Some of them really didn't qualify, but just let's say a good 40 or so, right?
Okay.
All right. So from that, 11 really actually self-reported either, and this was a key question because I want to distinguish. The question was whether they use eminent domain to expand, period, right? Or whether they expanded in predominantly black communities.
So they asked both times. Did you use it to expand no matter where you were talking about?
Right.
And then did you use it specifically?
But with the second question, it did not say eminent domain. They just said, did you expand, period, in primarily or predominantly black communities? So that's an important distinction, because they're not asking, did you use eminent domain only to expand in black communities? And they're not also asking, like, did you not only expand in black communities, right? Because eminent domain could have been used for, whatever community.
Right, in any community.
Exactly.
Right.
But I think the key was to make sure they tried to catch all in terms of whether expansion happened at all, I think was the intention on that. I can't really say for sure. But 11 universities self-reported either using eminent domain to expand or expanding in predominantly black communities, right? And I get a lot of questions on this because some people think they know, well, I'm sure that this university expanded or not. But what I found interesting is that some of the 11, so I wanted to point out a few that I thought were fairly interesting, right? Especially given their location. Like, we know about UVA, they self-reported, yes, that they expanded in primarily black community, and they did, in 2 cases, they did so, right? But universities like George Mason, which is up north, further north of Virginia, like there's been an acknowledgement that there was some eminent domain happening in Northern Virginia, right? George Mason is saying that we did not use eminent domain at all to expand. Neither did we expand in the black community. And I thought that was interesting because when I first started my reporting back, now I'm like divulging some information I haven't reported on yet. But when I first started researching this back in like 2021, before I even moved back to Virginia to pursue this full time, I had made contact with 1 or 2 people that felt that had happened there. And so what I'm finding in these survey responses versus what accounts people have is that there could be some discrepancy. And that's why I said I distinguished the self-reporting aspect of it, because the language was basically, when they said no to eminent domain, it was, there was no indication, we have no knowledge of it, or our current staff have not been aware of it. So there's no definite no there. You get what I'm saying?
Got you. I got you. So they are self-reporting. Were there any colleges in Hampton Roads outside of Christopher Newport that experienced
this? One across the street from us.
That would be Old Dominion University and Lambert's Point. Did they use eminent? What did they say?
So ODU said that ODU said that they did expand into a black community, but I believe they said they didn't recall. No, they did use eminent domain, and we reported on that. That ODU did use eminent domain, as well as they just expanded into Lambert's Point, and honestly, like, continue to be like expanding into that neighborhood today, right?
Just so that the audience knows, also, we did ask people from Old Dominion University, from Longwood, which was another school that talked about this. We do have some sound from Christopher Newport, which we're going to play in just a little bit.
All right, great.
But we did ask all of these entities to either call in or be a part of our show, and they either didn't get back to us or they declined. So
right. And I will, if I could just I have notes on those who did that maybe we may not be aware of. Like, we know about UVA, ODU was in our reporting, we know about Christopher Newport, but VMI did say they expanded into a black area. Let's see, VCU, we know about VCU, that's something that has not been like that's something that people in Richmond, if you go to Richmond and you ask somebody today, they can tell you, yes, they know about that, right? And then Radford University actually said that they purchased a black church back in 1961. Yeah.
Wow. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. What questions do you have about this use of expansion of public universities and the intersection with home ownership and particularly for African Americans? And also, I'd love to hear from you if you are a descendant of folks that lived in Shoe Lane. Give us a call. Let us know how this has impacted you and your family, because I think that those are the stories that will really drive home what has happened in the past. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. And if you're just joining us, we are talking about higher education at the intersection of housing inequality through the practice of public universities dismantling Black neighborhoods to accommodate their expansion. Our guest is award-winning investigative journalist Brandi Kellam. Give us a call, 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. We were talking about the statewide commission. Then there was a task force that has been put together from between Christopher Newport University and the city of Newport News. And it is co-chaired by Quentin Kidd, who's a provost at CNU, and by Curtis Bethany. I'm sorry, Curtis Bethany, who is the vice mayor of the city of Newport News. So they are the co-chairs. What struck me was the fact that there is no representation on the task force by families that were directly impacted by this work. Have you asked the question why, and what was the answer?
Well, I will say, not only have I asked that question, but I know families and people in the community who aren't even members of that community who have asked that question as well. And so there hasn't been a direct answer to that. I will say that task force has gone through sort of like this, I guess, so to speak, evolution in the last 2 years. And to be fair, I think they have fully started to understand that the fact that there weren't any families on this body caused a lot of issues for them being able to even connect with people from the community to even do their work, right? And that was addressed. I know we're going to get into some of the clips and from the interview I had with the co-chairs one-on-one. But to answer your question, yes, especially given, let me give you some context here as to why this may be an issue, that having no families represented on the 6-member body as an official member of the task force would be an issue for people who experience this tragedy, right? If you think about how everything has transpired, it has all pretty much been under the rug, right? When you think about how when the city decided to take in the 1960s, decided to use eminent domain to put Christopher Newport in this community, even though members of the community begged and pleaded, right? They showed up at city council meetings, they wrote letters. Even there was 1 or 2 white women who were a part of various churches in the area who also said this was an injustice. And despite all that, and also despite knowing there were multiple spaces or other areas the college could have been placed, they chose to put the college there, right? So if you imagine someone witnessing that and being the person that's affected by it, you would feel like, why are they really truly doing this to us, right? So that's a feeling of this is happening under the rug. There's something else at play here. Clearly, the feeling was they did not want us here. They did not want them there, right? So now let's fast forward to 1980, because I have to give this timeline, roughly late 1980s. Let's talk maybe like 1987-ish era, right? In the 1980s, there was a newspaper published, an article published in the Daily Press that revealed to the families that the college had voted to expand its boundaries to incorporate the perimeter homes, right?
Oh.
And this was unbeknownst to, from my reporting.
They found out from reading it in the paper?
Yes, correct.
Wow.
Yes, this is in the 1980s. That sparked a lawsuit, a federal lawsuit, against the college, the state of Virginia. There were several parties named on that: the CNU Board of Visitors, the governor of Virginia at the time was also named on this federal suit. And the community themselves formed a homeowners association to collectively fight against this changing of the college boundary. But the case was dismissed. Obviously, they lost. They were not able to succeed in preventing their homes to be included in that boundary, right? So now you take 1960s, you add on 1980s, right? And now we have the early 2010, the early 2000s. There's a new president, Paul Tribble, comes to the university and aggressively begins to the school. I won't say him, but like he was a president of the school at the time. Sure. Okay, you can 1 + 1 = 2. And the school aggressively started to acquire these homes. And so you see from like the late, let's say 1996-ish to like late 2010s, about a 15-year period where about 70, 80 homes are like drastically coming down. I mean, in one year, it was like maybe 5 or 6 or so, right? The demolition of properties every year at that number, and you're a remaining resident seeing that, that's also adding another level of trauma to your experience, especially if you have roots in that community that go back like this woman, like, or others who have roots going back to the late 1800s and have seen in each phase a battle being lost, right?
Yeah.
And so now you have a task force that is intentional about, who says they're intentional about exploring this and addressing this and trying to make the people who were traumatized feel whole again. And then from their outset doesn't have someone represented from the community on that panel, that can create additional problems. I'll just say problems for someone, or concerns, right? For someone who has known the history of this community, always felt like it should have been addressed, and sees this work being done and feels like there should be some representation there.
Well, let's listen to a clip from the two co-chairs about this very issue of the issue of trust within that community, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Okay.
I did not think originally it would be this challenging to engage with some of the families, but when you not only do the research, but the deeper you go, you realize that there are deep wounds that a lot of these families have experienced. So we've been trying our best to be respectful of that, and just whenever you were ready to come talk to us, we're open and ready for it. So that has been the challenge, but that's why when we included Councilman Marcellus Harris to be a part of it, someone who has ties already to a lot of these families, that was able to build a little bit more trust with them and interaction with them.
We recognize the trust issue. I don't think we recognize how deeply the trust issue was there. Once we began to understand how deeply embedded the mistrust was, that was when we shifted and said, Councilman Harris is not on the task force, but he clearly has more trust than the task force does. So let's use that as an entree and hope that we then can begin. And we also understood that we would build trust when people could see the work we were doing, but we couldn't show them the work we were doing until we had completed it. We needed the time and the resources to get all that data.
So that first voice was Curtis Bethany, who's vice mayor of Newport News, followed by Quentin Kidd, provost at CNU. Your reaction to what they said? Yeah.
So first, they mentioned Councilman Marcellus Harris. So he actually had, his father had property in that community. He was pastor of First Baptist Church Morrison. The church no longer is on that footprint, has since moved up further north, Newport News. Okay. So now my reaction to the trauma that they're speaking to, right? That's exactly what it is, right? And so I think that clip shows and reveals that they have processed the fact that maybe having, and to be clear, the task force members, from what I understand, were appointed to this. So I don't know what sort of power they would have to bring more people on to the task force, right? Okay. I want to be fair in saying that, right? Mm-hmm. The fact that we're just speaking to the fact alone that there isn't family on this working group. And so I do think that they have started to recognize that there was a trust issue, especially given the history of what happened to this community. And this clip actually came, so to give context, from a public meeting. So the task force had their first public meeting with members of the public, where they were directly addressing the members of the public to give updates about what they've been doing for the past almost nearly 2 years, right? 2 years now, but back then in November, it was just almost 2 years at that point. They gave an update on that. They shared they acknowledged, just like they acknowledged in this clip, some of the trust issues and concerns there. They did acknowledge indirectly some of the frustrations that folks have been having, not just family, but other people who have been advocating for families for the past almost 2 years, right? They acknowledged that, and they used that meeting, I think, to really manage people's expectations, but try to maybe do a little reset on how they can become more open about their process going forward.
And how did the community respond?
Well, it's difficult to be honest, it's difficult to gather from that meeting how the community has how they have responded to that, because the meeting itself was very structured, right? So you had a presentation, and then you had breakout sessions where there was feedback given by people who attended, and some of those could have been people from the community, some may have just been people curious about what was going on, right? So those breakout sessions were not public. So they really used it, I think, as to gather more feedback.
More information and more feedback for the work that they're doing now.
And the questions that they asked in those breakout sessions did seem to seek to ask what they could do better in terms of communicating their work. And also at that meeting, they did debut a website that is public as well, that shows the research that they have been collecting. And that website will continue to be updated. They've said that website will continue to be updated as they continue to do their work.
Okay, 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Effie joins us from Williamsburg. Hello, you're on the air, Effie. Hi, you're on the air.
I'm calling from Williamsburg. I know you all are focusing on what the universities have done to different people, but I would like to know, when are you going to focus on, like, the city of Williamsburg just came and took the whole block for my family. There was stores there, restaurant, cleaners, and homes. And they say the reason was they didn't want homes and businesses mixed together.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on, Effie, apparently, throughout the country. Maybe that can be Brandi's next investigative piece. But we really appreciate the call, because I think what the issue is here is that this issue resonates across many different areas, you know, just like you were talking about earlier. I mean, we are all very familiar with, like, the highways that go split communities right in half and so forth. But she's talking about, you know, again, this community, and it was completely destroyed.
Yes. And I think to that point, right, this is just one piece of the puzzle, but it's such in some cases, it's such an extreme dynamic that happened here. So we talk about Christopher Newport a lot, but I know you all reached out to a few other universities for comment as well. But Longwood University is another university that expanded into a predominantly Black community at the same time of massive resistance in Virginia. So you
at the same time when they shut the school down.
Yes, literally at the same time.
Wow.
Right. So when you think, when you think about that, it's like, wow, right? So these case studies are so extreme that it really, even though university expansion into Black communities is just one piece of the puzzle, when you really start to break those stories down, you start to see a lot of trauma and pain and injustice that has not been addressed. And I think that's why this issue has gained a lot of attention, because no one thinks about higher education as
well, higher education is supposed to be the place where you are able to learn and grow and improve your lot in life, so to speak. And so it really is a dichotomy that the very thing that's supposed to, that everyone says is going to elevate you, is actually, making it harder for personal wealth to be passed down, and et cetera.
It is, and it's an ugly history. Right. Yeah. It's a really ugly history that fits into a bigger narrative of ugly history in this country. Right. But at the same time, I think that there's an opportunity here to address, and in Virginia, I think, maybe potentially a blueprint, because this seems to be very unique among our country, that this state is looking at it in this way from a legislative sanctioned body and a city university-led task force.
Which is not necessarily the case in other states where the same thing has happened.
Exactly.
Let's talk to Gary, who is from Norfolk, but originally from Newport News. Hi, Gary, you're on the air.
How you doing?
All righty.
A few years ago, when the city of Chesapeake Public Library System allowed us, during the COVID part, access to AncestryLibrary.com, I was too busy trying to hunt down all my family that would be listed in the 1950 census. And then after I finished that, I started looking for their future spouses. And I found a lot that was in that later moved to my neighborhood where I lived at in North Newport News. And in my neighborhood, around 63, 64 thereabouts, one of the families that moved and built near us came from Shoe Lane. And I did not know that they were evicted from Shoe Lane or this or that, but I do remember being too young to see a whole lot. That we visited a couple of people around that Shoe Lane area. And later on in the 80s and 90s, I learned about a family that had tried to add on to their house or do something, that lived on Prince Drew Road, but the city would not give them a permit to do that. So later on, they ended up selling it. And then in the 90s, sometime, I'm watching a city council meeting on TV and come finding that that same house the Christopher Newport had acquired, and they wanted to turn it into something or adjust something. And the people showed up saying that, y'all want to give them a permit to do that, but you wouldn't give us a permit to do this. When we lived and owned that house for I don't know how many years, but it was one of the black families that was gotten rid of or removed. Well, no, they sold. They ended up selling, but other neighborhoods, there was another street that spurred off of it. Now, all the homes on Prince Drew Road was on the south side of it. There were no homes on the north side, primarily because there was a ditch there. Well, a ditch on both sides, but it was a ditch on the north side, and then there was the backyards of houses in another neighborhood accessible from Hyden Boulevard. And Hyden Boulevard was named after one of the early mayors of Newport News.
Gary's going to give us the full story. Absolutely. Gary, thank you so much for the call. We appreciate that. Go ahead.
I was going to say some of what he is sharing, I've also heard similar stories, right? So I do think there's, like I said, you had asked me, I think at one point, basically what I'm saying, there's a lot more to this history, and the fact that the more you discover, the more you talk about it, the more you realize there's a lot more. It just goes to show you that this story is just very important, critical.
So one of the things that you talked about as I was watching the interview that you did with the two co-chairs, you asked them a lot about process, and they were very specific about how they felt it was very important to do the research first and then get the human story. Do you agree with that process, or maybe that's not a fair question? Do you think that maybe now when they hear the stories of people that it helps put that research information into better context?
That's
Let's
a great
look at
question.
it that way. Yeah.
I definitely think that you can only do but so much research before you do have to start speaking to people to put that research into context. And here's the main reason why I believe that, right? And this is just based on my reporting as well, right? The numbers can look one way, but the true history and the context that helps you understand what the numbers are really saying is going to come from the mouths of the people that experienced the trauma, right? And so not that it's a bad idea to do research, because I do think that's important. You do have to know the facts.
Right.
And they have felt like
because they
wanted...
even talked about how they were surprised at the number of homes that when they first started, they didn't think it was as many homes as they.
On that part, I'm going to say that's a little surprising to me because anybody that watched Uprooted, the documentary, or read the stories would know it was way more homes than that. But that's neither here nor there. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But I will say, even when I discovered the history, the reason I talked about what drew me to this, it was because I discovered there were 5 homes. But then when I started to dig even further, I found out that there were a lot more homes. There were homes that were in high number. They were high quality, high quantity number of homes in later years that were demolished and went down, that were attached or tied to this community. And when I started looking at real estate assessor records and saying, what? Like, I'm like, this home was demolished in 2003. Wait a minute, this home is 2005. What's going on here?
And that's the shocking part, is that from the 60s all the way through, that it's continuing.
Correct.
That's
the part.
So right now there are 5
There's
homes
still
left?
5 physical homes.
5 physical homes.
Yes. No, actually, so there are 5. So some would argue 6 because, but when I say 5, I mean still people living in those homes. Because some structures, like one home was preserved. It is owned by the college, but it's being used like as some athletic facility. And I think that's where one family I believe that you heard from had said that they had a family home there, right? So that home is still there. The structure is there, but it's owned by the college. But yes, to answer your question, there are 5 homes left on the corner of Shoe Lane and Moores Lane. And then there's one, so there's 4 there. And there's one, if you watched Uprooted, the documentary, you'll see it's like literally in the middle of the campus. Like they can't even get to their house without driving through the parking lot of the university. And they don't even have like it's the driveway and all that. It's just so it's like the university just built itself right around literally,
them
they're
because
like
they're
right
not moving.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
Yes. And I don't think they plan on moving either.
I want to play one more clip because I wanted to talk about what they're hoping that the outcome of this report will mean.
Okay.
But I think at the end of the day, when we issue a report, we will have done right by our charge. We will have done right by the residents and former residents of the neighborhood, and we will have done right by the university and by the city.
There is nothing that I think I would want us to do different, because the families were still the priority. Trying to engage with the families first was always the goal. There were outside elements that came into play as well. And so I think the approach was right.
What do you think the families in particular, first, let's start with them, and then expand out to the rest of the stakeholders in this whole thing. What's the end game? Is it reparations? Is it I'm sorry and an apology? Is what do people say they want out of this? Because you've talked to these families. I have.
So before I get into that, I just want to make sure I contextualize the final report, so people understand what that actually is. So so the task force has been tasked, for lack of a better word, with using all the research that they're going to continue to acquire, and then interviews they plan to do with impacted families to inform a final report of recommendations that then parties that have the authority to enact can do. So that would be either the City of Newport News, the university to a certain extent, whatever authority they have, and the state of Virginia, whatever authority they have, right? So that final report is expected to be produced, they say right now, near the end, like the second half of 2026. Okay. So now let's go back to your question about what the families are saying they want. It's interesting because I've heard different things, right? Some people are saying they want actual cash reparations, right? And many of those are coming from this position of, well, they didn't feel like they got fair payment for those homes back in the 1960s, or because the university existed as pretty much a neighbor to the remaining homes, there could have been some impact or effect to their property taxes or things like that they would have had to pay, and they want that to be explored. So cash has been on the minds of some of these families. Some of them want an apology, an actual acknowledgement of that this was done, this harm was done, and we are wrong for what we did and the manner in which we did it. And that wouldn't just come from the college, that would also come from the City of Newport News, because they were the ones that initiated this eminent domain taking that then had this domino effect in general. But I think the most interesting thing that and I think will be a challenge to both of these groups looking into this, is that these things happened generations ago, right? You had families that I'm very fortunate that the family I portrayed in Uprooted, Mr. Johnson, he's in his mid to late 80s. He's still around to share this history. But think about that for a second. So if you think about that in the case of other areas, other colleges in the state where the commission is looking to explore, or just Christopher Newport alone and the jointly led task force, and the act of even trying to locate descendants, because some of those directly impacted or who would know the story may not even be it, right? Mm-hmm. And then trying to track down their descendants and asking them what they want. They may or might not even know the true story.
Because back then also people didn't talk about the things that were going on with the children that were engaged and so
I
forth.
Think that's why there was this push to have members of the family on the task force to ensure that that they were exhaustive in making sure that they got the true story of what happened, so that this would not be overlooked again, right?
How is Christopher Newport being a good neighbor to those who are left?
That's a really complicated question.
From their perspective?
Oh, man. Okay, so I will say from their perspective, now we have to look at Christopher Newport now under a new leadership is not the same
as
Christopher
before.
Newport.
Right. And I guess
different leadership.
What I'm trying to get to is an acknowledgement that this was an issue, and B, okay, what can we do now in today's time to make this better?
I think some people feel like there could be small fixes while the task force is working. I think that was my takeaway from my reporting from this latest update that they gave. That even if they're doing their research and they're talking to families for a report that could come somewhere later this year, or maybe not, maybe next year, what are the things they could be doing now to address the feelings and concerns and trauma of the families? What could the college be doing now while the task force is working on this? What could the city be doing now while the task force is working on this? Yeah. And so, yes, I do think that in terms of being a good neighbor, I think some want to see a show of good faith.
So where do you go from here? Are you still following this story?
Yes,
I know that you're a fellow and you're doing a lot of different things, but are you going to continue to follow this story through? Absolutely.
I have been on this since I started researching. I learned about this history in 2021. So I'm committed to the cause, I guess you could say, as a journalist wanting to explore this history and really deeply investigate how this caused and affected Black land loss in our state and in our country.
Now, in Virginia, I understand also appropriated more money to the commission in order to help them with their work. So they seem to be pretty serious about looking at this issue across the Commonwealth.
They got a huge increase, a $200,000 increase in their budget to explore this issue. Yeah.
Wow. Where can people find Uprooted? Can they find it online?
The documentary they can find on YouTube. If you go to if you search YouTube and you go YouTube ProPublica Uprooted, you can find it there, the documentary. You can also just search Uprooted on Google or whatever your search engine is, and ProPublica, and you'll find it that way. That's the easiest way to find it.
Okay, great. Brandi Kellam, thank you so much for sharing this and bringing us up to date. And we will stay on top of this so we can find out what the final reports are.
Thank you.
I know you'll be just as excited about that final report as the rest of us.
Thank you for
Absolutely.
having me.
And audience, thank you for spending an hour of your precious time with us today on Another View. Now, you can listen to this show again by visiting WHRO.org, or you can look for our podcast on your favorite streaming platform. Next week on Another View, Dr. Eric Claville with the award-winning Claville Report. And we're going to be talking about a lot of the things that seem to be happening in our country today, and also looking at America on the world stage and where we stand there. Our theme music is an original composition created especially for Another View by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Jordan Christie is our audio engineer. And Dr. Barry Graham answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Stay warm, stay safe, and be sure to join us again next Thursday at noon for Another View. And Alana, who called in from Norfolk, I'm so sorry we ran out of time. Take care, everybody. See you next week.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, carrying out your charitable wishes forever, whether it's helping shelter animals, feeding the homeless, enhancing the arts, or supporting students. Learn more at leaveabequest.org.